which was just published on February 3rd. And it was, with Amazon, you can't really choose your date, but I tried to time it just right. And I got February 3rd, which happens to be St. Blaise's feast day, and he's the patron saint of Dubrovnik. And it turns out that the town of Dubrovnik has been celebrating that feast day since 972, and he was kind of helped to save Dubrovnik from the invasion of the Venetians. And now it's a UNESCO heritage cultural heritage event, and it would be wonderful to go to it sometime. But anyway, I'm hoping he's blessing my book, and I'll get further than with book one. But anyway, the novel takes place in my hometown, which is on the Monterey Bay, kind of almost halfway between Santa Cruz and Monterey, about 90 miles south of San Francisco. And it's been known for agriculture. It was the apple capital of the world for the first part of the 20th century, the first half. And now it's known for strawberries, Driscoll strawberries, and also the Monterey or the Martinelli apple cider is produced there and has been in town for a long time. And you may be wondering about my cover, and I'm going to explain a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But the book is about a Croatian immigrant who basically makes his fortune in the town's apple business and uses his influence to help win freedom for his fatherland during World War I. Now, this book was not anything I planned to write, but it came about when I was in my hometown for a book signing for my first novel, The California Immigrant, and this is the book cover on that. I happened to be at the bookstore, and a few people were around my table, and a woman came in and started talking about a book. And since I hadn't really known too much about it, she went and got it off the shelf and started taking me through it. And it was called Blossoms into Gold, which was about Croatians in the Pajaro Valley, which is the valley where our town is located. And so when she left and the book event was over, the book was still sitting there, I decided, well, I'll just go ahead and buy this. And I started going through it and was just really so taken with everything that these immigrants had to go through to do this. And I was also just amazed. In my story, my character starts out in 1881 in the transcontinental railroad has already been built, but Croatians had been coming over before that, and they first started coming around the gold. They came for the gold rush. They may have come sooner, but they came even just to work the crops and then go back. But they came around Cape Horn, which you probably know is so treacherous, and then some of them would even bushwhack through, through Panama. And because the canal had not been built yet, and then they would catch another ship headed north. So, but they were seamen. That's what they did, and they were great seamen and competitors of the Venetians. So anyway, then my next step was to call the author, one of the authors of the book. Two sisters wrote it. And we had a very nice chat. And then she referred me to another book that I didn't know about, which was called The Slavonic Community of Watsonville, California. Someone had taken about 40 years of newspaper articles that mentioned Croatians and put them in this book. And it was the turn of the century, which was the period of time that my book covers. And so I started going through that. It was over 800 pages of articles. And I found a lot of interesting period details and a lot of interesting details about the apple industry and so forth. But then I came across some incredible information that was happening around the period of World War I, before World War I. And representatives started coming to town because this was a fairly good sized Croatian community, and there were other people there from the Balkan countries as well, some Serbians and some Montenegrins, but not in the numbers of the Croatians. But it was also wealthy because these people had made had this international business and made quite a bit of money. So, I was just, just really overwhelmed because I didn't know any of this history. But getting back to the book Blossoms into Gold, I forgot to mention that in going through it, there was a section on families, and I did not know that I was related to these two patriarchs who are my great great uncles. I had not heard about them. I don't know why, but one of them actually brought my grandmother over, and she lived with the other one for about 5 years before she married. And not only that, when I saw the picture of the first one, I was like struck because my older son bears a very strong resemblance to him. So, it's just like, I have to write this book. It's just written in the stars. And anyway, so now that brings me to the cover, which is, I don't know if you can see that very well, but this is a picture of the Fort of St. Lawrence, which is in Dubrovnik, just outside the Old Town. And when you walk in, there is an inscription that freedom is not sold for all the gold in the world, and freedom is really one of the major theme of this book, not only for my character Nikola Markovich himself, but also for his fatherland as well. And so, but the interesting thing I did, you might also recognize this if you watch Game of Thrones. It's the Red Keep. And they have a great Game of Thrones tour there, which my older son wanted to do. So I did go on the Game of Thrones tour and learned some very interesting things, because it turned out that the Venetians had planned to build a fort right there. And they got that information about 3 months before. And in that 3 months, they constructed their own fort. And not only that, the walls are extremely thick on the side facing the sea, but less so on the side facing the town. And the reason was they wanted to be able to shoot a cannonball through it and collapse the fort if the enemy got inside. So they had some very clever things that they had done. And but I thought, this really, and also one of my main, the readers that are probably going to be really drawn to the book are going to be people that are Croatian or have an interest in Croatia. And I think this is definitely, hopefully, will draw them to the book and the story. So the story centers on Nikola Markovich, who is from a town of Chilipi, which is really where my relatives come from, which is the same name as the airport in Dubrovnik. And he's 16 years old when he immigrates to the United States. Something happens on his way that does cause him shame, but it's important to the story. And and everyone says they have, you don't want your hero to be perfect. And some people criticize my other hero in my other book, Martin, for being too good. So this guy's not quite as good, but he's pretty amazing. And the funny thing is about writing, and I don't know if any of you read about what different authors have to say, but I'll be writing away. I was writing away, and then something was starting to happen on the page. And I was like, no, I don't want to go there. And I don't want to do this. I want my hero to be pure and good and just never, have no faults. But, the muse or whoever kind of forced me that way. And I said, okay, I'll just go with it and we'll see what happens. And it actually made for a much better story which I could not foresee, but obviously the muse knew what she or he was doing, and so led me in that direction. So after moving to San Francisco, he gets an opportunity to go to Watsonville, to get involved in the apple packing business. And really what made Watsonville the world capital of apples was not well, the apples themselves were really high quality. There were Newtown Pippins and Belle Fleurs, which I don't even think you can find today in the stores. But anyway, they were very good apples, and the soil was the right condition, the temperature was the right condition. But these Croatians became the packers and the marketers and the traders. And they came from a background where trade had been basically was in their DNA if they hadn't actually done it, because that's what Croatians did back in the old country to survive. And so they started developing markets. They faced so many obstacles, just the train routes alone. They managed to get the train routes changed so they could get their apples out east a lot quicker. But then there were the freight cars that were not air conditioned and were, apples can stay a long time if they are kept in the right conditions. And what they used to do in Watsonville was they would box them up and put them under these stands of redwoods. But in these freight cars, they would, the fruit would not hold up. And then they also had problems with dishonest commission men, whether they were New York or Chicago or wherever. And then the codlin moth was another issue, and spraying was a problem for the trees and the fruit. So there were a lot of obstacles. But somehow, and then another one, of course, too, was packing house fires. When I was going through the newspaper articles, there were so many packing house fires. And there might have been a few that were set deliberately, but because you had the so-called fruit tramps, which they called themselves, coming through, they would often go into the packing houses to spend the night to get out of the cold weather. And, they're probably a little bit too careless with their cigarettes or matches, and they would set them on fire. And, it wasn't easy to put these out. And many times people lost everything in their packing house. So that was one of the obstacles. So it makes you wonder how these people who were, basically uneducated and hadn't had this exposure to business, they didn't have MBAs or whatever. How did they manage to create this successful enterprise where they were shipping apples all over the world? And during World War I, they did ship a lot over to London, because England really liked the apples. They really liked the Newtown Pippins, and occasionally a U-boat would would get the shipment, but they were doing shipments all around the world. So this little colony of Croatians, I guess, became fairly well known, and because they also had made some money. And eventually, before World War I, reps were coming, various representatives were coming through to promote the cause for a Yugoslav state. And Slavic people had actually started something back in 1848. And so this had been a long held dream of them. But there was the Serbian council from New York, along with a NYU professor by the name of Michael Pupin. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, Carol. I know that he's deceased now, but he was very involved in the cause, and as well as some of these committees from London and so forth. They had come through to to gather the support for the cause. So what I would like to do now is just read a little excerpt from the book. And this will be Nick and I think it's brother Frank talking. And there is someone mentioned by the name of Dr. Vidmar, who was a diplomat with the Austrian Council in San Francisco. He was actually a Slovenian, and which is a Slav. And so he was very sympathetic to the Yugoslav cause. And the Slovenians were the only Slavs that were allowed to serve in the Austrian diplomatic corps. I did change his name. I used a different name, but he was a real person, and the way they connected with him, he came to town when the town was doing their Apple Annual for about 3 years, somewhere, I think they started in 1910. So they had 3 or 4 years of this big Apple Annual, which drew a lot of people, including this man, Dr. Vidmar. The situation over in Austria doesn't look good, Nick said. I can't believe the Crown suspended the Croatian constitution over a little complaint, and now it seems there will be war in the Balkans, Frank said. It's like Dr. Vidmar warned. The Austrians are looking for a way to start a war to put an end to Pan-Slavism. Are you going to San Francisco on Tuesday to discuss fundraising for the Balkan War? Wouldn't dare miss it. Besides, it will give me another chance to touch base with Dr. Vidmar. I want to offer my services. The meeting on October 15th was more than fundraising. 40,000 Croatians in the state had organized themselves into the Croatian League with the goal of winning independence for Croatia. The plan was to send fighters to the country to join their brethren in the cause. Timing would depend on the Balkan War. Balkan League countries of Serbia, Montenegro, Bulgaria, and Greece had banded together to drive the Turks out of Europe. Croatians knew war would occupy Austria's attention, and they intended to take advantage of that opportunity. Bay Area men from Balkan League countries readied themselves to depart in a few days, and as soon as war was declared, Croatian men would follow to their own battle. Nick pulled Dr. Vidmar aside to have a word with him. How can I help you in this effort? First, I'm sure you understand that the War of Independence has to be kept quiet. And in my position, they could try me for treason, of course. That being said, men and money will be required. Through our network, I will get you the specifics. You can count on me. But for now, we all need to appear to be focused on the Balkan War. And it is important to us too. Austria and Germany have a Middle Europa plan to squash the Slavs. They know Russia will not hesitate to step in to protect their Slav brothers. And once they do, they will open the door to all-out war. Ultimately, they plan to partition Russia amongst themselves. I don't understand. They've done it before. Remember Poland? They partitioned Poland. They partitioned that Slav country right off the map. Nick was speechless. All this was too much to process. Vidmar caught his astonishment. Now maybe you understand what we're up against. Our very identity is at stake. On October 21, a steamer loaded with Serbians and other Balkan League nationalities left San Francisco Harbor for the war. The First Balkan War was short-lived and ending after only 10 weeks on December 3rd with a victory by the Balkan League. This victory came as a surprise to Austria and Germany, which were hoping a defeat would crush Serbia and open the way for Middle Europa. The war had been a bloody one, leaving thousands homeless and without basic necessities, especially women and children. The Slovenian colony in Watsonville planned a grand ball to raise funds. At the meeting of the Austrian Benevolent Society, Nick stood up and said, "Everyone should buy a ticket to help. They're only 50 cents and women come for free." Peace negotiations hit a snag, and the war resumed on February 3rd, waging until the second armistice was reached on April 15th. Then on June 29th, Bulgaria made a surprise attack on its former allies, and the Second Balkan War broke out. This war was even shorter than the first one, a 6-week struggle with more bloodshed. Those Balkan wars were total lunacy, Frank said as he reviewed paperwork in the office. The worst of it was they didn't give us enough time to launch our bid for independence. We just couldn't get over there fast enough. It seems this won't be the last time there's an opportunity while Austria is distracted with war. A few weeks later, Frank came in the office waving a letter. King Nicholas responded, "You've lost me. Don't you remember I sent him a telegram on his capture of Scutari from the Turks? Now it's coming back to me. I thought you were off your nut for sending a telegram to the King of Montenegro." He expressed his thanks and reinforced the brotherhood of Croatians and Serbs. When we have a common enemy, we unite. Austria never fails to offer herself. Suspending our constitution created the first bond. Now, the Balkan Wars, which we all know Austria and Germany were behind, have created another. And if Dr. Vidmar's prediction is right, a big event will soon happen to bond us even more tightly. So let's see here where I am. I don't know if any of you tuned in for the Western Historical Society's event last week, which was on World War I in Connecticut. And they had a state librarian presenting, but what really struck me was the difference between the two coasts. Of course, in Connecticut, we had the armament factories. And I think because of that, and from other, World War I books I've read, people in the armament industry probably knew what was happening in Europe. So Connecticut was actually the first state to prepare for the war. But when I think about what was going on over on the West Coast and in my hometown, I was just amazed that here these people are actually fighting to create for freedom for their country over there. So that was something very interesting that I learned. And quite honestly, this book was just an amazing experience for me, because I did discover so many things about the history of the world and the town and what had gone on during that period of time that I just didn't know. A couple of other interesting things that I learned. During World War I, there were 40,000 Slav children starving in that part of the world. And Croatia and Slovenia petitioned Austria to feed them if they would relieve them of having to send food to the army, which of course they denied. But these children, I think, were from mostly Bosnia and Herzegovina, but they took them in their homes anyways, 40,000 of them, and fed them and helped them survive the war. And that's a story that, who knew? I mean, I've never heard about that before, but I came across it in these articles. And I tried to research it to find out more, but I wasn't able to come up with anything. But I thought that was an amazing story that is, not told. And also, we all know about Japanese internment camps during World War II, but there were actually 4 internment camps in the US during World War I. And the one in Georgia had a high number of musicians from the Boston Symphony. And this was one of the things that was going on. I mean, a lot of, German sympathizers. And then, of course, if the Croatians immigrated on an Austrian passport, because officially they were Austrian subjects. So when the war broke out, there was a lot of that going on too, a lot of suspicion and fear of internment camps. So it was really quite an experience writing this and learning about this history, which I don't think is that well known. So I guess right now, I think that's about all I have to say, and it's open to questions if you have any.
Okay. I will ask people to unmute themselves when they have a question. If you have a question for Barbara, please speak up.
Don't be shy.
When you were referring to Slavs, were you talking about people from Slovenia, or were you talking about
Slavic people?
People like Bosnia, Herzegovina,
Croatians, right? Croatians are actually Southern Slavs.
Okay.
There's different Slavic groups, but then it gets confusing because people from Slovenia sometimes are called Slavs as well. It's all very, the history of that part of the world is very confusing. And Russia, they're a nation of Eastern Slavs, Polish, Western Slavs. In fact, I read that the majority of Europeans are Slavic.
Well, But are people from Slovenia called, are they Slavs?
I think they can be called, they are Slavic people. They are Slavic people, but they might be called Slavs
Okay.
as a short, as just a way of shortening Slovenia.
Thank you. I just have to ask you a question. When you were in Dubrovnik,
Yes.
did you by chance take that walk all the way around the
Yes,
fort?
they did. Yes, that is quite amazing.
Oh, I thought that was so beautiful. And there's a restaurant right there that's part of the wall. Oh, my phone doesn't want to stop ringing now because of this. Do you know where I'm talking about? It's a
Yes.
restaurant that's just hanging.
We stopped at a place just for like a drink, but we didn't eat on the wall. But our hotel had a restaurant. We stayed a couple of nights in a hotel that was outside the city, and it was more of a modern hotel. But I wanted to stay inside the city for one night, and our hotel had this a rooftop restaurant, and it had an amazing view over the old town, and you could see out to the Adriatic and the wall and so forth. And it's really quite impressive. And another thing I learned about Dubrovnik, because I was doing a course on medieval cities, apparently, well, I think it was in the 1600s, I think, or 1200s, they had a huge earthquake which devastated the city. And they actually, the Venetians were people they, had a love-hate relationship with. They actually modeled the legislature on the one on Venice's, but they also brought in all these Italian artisans to help rebuild the city. And this professor was talking about, a lot of Dubrovnik does have the feel of Venice to it, and some of the architecture. No canals, but we have the Adriatic. So are there any other questions? It was quite an interesting history, and there was a lot going on there during the war in terms of spies, and it was just, it's hard to believe, but you read these thrillers and so forth, but there was a lot going on just in my own little area, which a lot of it wasn't talked about at the time, but later on, the district attorney disclosed that there was a whole nest of spies in Santa Cruz, for instance.
Hi. Thank you for your presentation. I really appreciated it. I love historical novels. And I've never been to Dubrovnik. I'm sorry to say, it sounds beautiful and I'd love to go someday, maybe. I was wondering if you could describe more of the story of your book. I know it's supposed to go through a number of generations, and I wondered if you could speak about some of the other characters and the whole story.
Well, if I can, it could take a long time to do that. But, well, I guess he comes to San Francisco, and one of his first stops after he gets there, he stops in a coffee house. The Croatians actually owned a lot of the businesses along the wharf area. They had green grocers and coffee houses and some restaurants. And Tadich's is actually the oldest restaurant, I think, west of the Mississippi. And it's been there since around Gold Rush time. And there was a restaurant, they opened a restaurant in Washington, D.C., which I ate at once. I don't ever remember eating at the one in San Francisco, but maybe I was taken there as a child. But he stops in a coffee house and he meets the owner and the daughter, and then he becomes close to that family. And eventually he does meet her, and that he does marry the younger, the middle daughter, Jelena. And that proves pretty important because in 1906 there's the earthquake. So and which also strikes the town of Watsonville, but not nearly as severely as San Francisco itself. And so there's that whole episode of going up there and trying to rescue the family, and people were catching boats across the bay to Oakland. And one thing I learned this time, which I didn't know when I wrote my last book, was that Oakland welcomed 3 times its population and brought them into their homes and fed them and sheltered them. And I was just overwhelmed when I read that generosity and kindness of those people, that they did that. And then of course he brought the family home, so he had that connection to that whole event. Let's see, a lot. And then there's another episode that's pretty important, involves internment camps. A couple of his younger brothers, decided that they wanted to take an opportunity to go to Canada and homestead. And at that time, I learned that there were men from Canada going around that part of Europe offering this opportunity, and they wanted land in Croatia, just like in other parts of Europe. The first son inherited the property, which in this family's case wasn't really a whole lot, but everybody else had to go off, and the sons at least had to go off and make their own way in the world. So they opted to go out to Canada, and eventually they were interned. There were internment camps in Canada that interned Croatians and Ukrainians and people like that. So that was kind of a big episode, because one of the brothers escapes and makes his way to California and gets help to get his other brother out of the internment camp. And then they come back to Watsonville, and they end up getting involved in being orchardists, because they did not like being in the packing sheds. Another episode was the Spanish flu, which struck, and of course, we know we're all going through the pandemic, and there's so many similarities. It was interesting reading all these articles and the similarities to what we're going through, and the controversies at first over masks and what you should do. And so there were a lot of different things like that, and inspectors going into the packing houses and requiring certain things, and coming into conflict with the owners of the packing houses. Let me see. Well, and eventually, near the end, he finds out through Dr. Vidmar that the United States is going to be changing its immigration policy, and they're going to be using a date that is decades older, so that they can limit the number of people coming from Eastern Europe. And the old way they used to do it was a percentage of people. And so they didn't want to use current numbers. So they went way back. And so he ends up going to Croatia at the end to bring back family members of people that are in our town, so that they can get out before they won't have an opportunity. Because even though the country is now free, it's still going to be a long time before things are back to normal, and or not normal, but are better there. And there are going to be people that are just going to miss the opportunities depending on how old they are. So he had gone over there, and actually I use this whole episode at the end of the book, but in real life, this person actually went over once and brought about 20 people back. And I was just amazed at all the things that he did and all the lives he changed by doing some of these things. So it was quite amazing. And at the end, basically, he had most of his family there. His older brother did stay behind. His older sister came also because her husband had died in the war, and some of her children were already in America. So they were pretty much reunited in America, although the older brother did stay behind.
Barbara, there was a question from Charles, who's one of our guests in the audience, and his question was an editor significantly involved in writing your novels? And if so, how did it impact your story?
No, because it's I'm indie published. If you're going to get that kind of developmental editor, it's going to be very expensive. So I didn't use one. I did use an editor, to help proofread and line edit. And that's the biggest problem with being an indie publisher, is not having, really good editing. And I think that if you were with a publisher, they might, have, more of these developmental, they might put you through a developmental edit, and then the story would probably be better. And although, I mean, I don't really know whether it'd be better, but it probably would be different, because they would want to make money from the book, and they would maybe want to put more sensational episodes in. And that was one reason why I also wanted to indie publish. So I wanted to do it my way. I didn't want to change things. I don't know if you've read the Kite Runner, which is a very popular book a few years ago and still is selling very well. I read that the last third of the book was changed by the editor, and there is a shift, and it seems very different from the first part. It becomes more sensational. And I didn't like the last part as well, quite honestly, but I probably did help sell the book.
And just to follow up, both of your books are indie published, and I'm sure that the whole process of publishing the first book and writing The California Immigrant definitely impacted what you did with this. So did you learn something the first time that you changed the second time?
Well, I did use some of the same sources. I was very fortunate, like with my covers, I actually found a historic cover designer online. And so I used her again because I was happy with her, and that was her specialty. I also used the same formatter who I had come across online. And this is the thing with being an indie publisher. Obviously, a lot of these things you could just do yourself. But if you're not skilled at it, you're not going to get as good a result, and there's going to be a learning curve to it. So trying to find the right resources. I did end up using a different editor, but now I also have invested in an editing tool, Pro Writing Aid. And I actually, after the editor went through the book, I actually went through it again because I started seeing errors that she didn't pick up. And so I went through with that tool, and that was very helpful. So it's not, it's not that hard to publish a book. It's starting to become, writing the book is easy. Selling the book is hard. Publishing it, getting a cover done, getting it formatted is, if you find the right resources, is not that hard. But it is trying to market the book. I'm actually pretty fortunate from the standpoint I have a natural niche. Last time, the Croatian Fraternal Union, who I sent my copy of my book and press release to, actually put the press release in their newsletter, which went out to 60,000 subscribers. So that was a really targeted list. There's another Slavonic American cultural organization in my area of California that also has given publicity. I had sent some information to the Native Daughters of the Golden West, and actually they invited me to join. So they put it in their newsletter, and that's another natural niche for this kind of book. And they I don't know how to actually market to the whole group. I think you have to go by individual chapter, and there's also a sons organization. And right now what I'm doing, I'm trying to learn Amazon ads, because obviously that is how you can really reach a lot more readers. And your book just can't get discovered unless you advertise. And because of the technology, because I'm not a digital native, I would, do webinars and so forth, and but I wasn't really confident in what I needed to do. So I'm making that commitment this year. One thing I am trying to do more of is figure out a way to do, I'm more of a pantser versus a plotter. I have, the way I've done these two books is I've created a timeline, and I knew that I wanted to include a certain detail. So I was writing to a lot of this, and I write by cause and effect. And I like to do it that way because it leaves me open to inspiration or to finding something. I'll decide I've got to Google something on this, and all of a sudden I find out, a lot of new information that just takes me in a much more significant path, on a much more significant path. But I think there's a disadvantage to doing that too. So I'm trying to learn more about how to maybe at least create a little more structure, because you do need to have something to write towards. And I spent a lot of time listening to writers, even screenwriters. And a lot of people feel like you need to sort of know what your endpoint is and kind of work backwards. And with these stories, I kind of knew an endpoint, maybe not the exact ending, but I knew what I was working towards all the time. So it more or less kept me on track. And then I also have a word count that I try to do every day, minimum 1,000. And I've been trying to build up to 1,500. I don't know if I'll ever do 2,000, but some people would rather just say I'm going to write for 2 hours. But I think having the actual number of words you have to get on the page, you can do a lot of things in 2 hours that don't end up in words on the page. So I prefer to have an actual word count that kind of keeps me to task. And other than that, I mean, I guess a lot of things are very similar. I wouldn't say one book was really easier than the other, because with both I had a lot of information to work with. And so that those things were pretty similar. And because I didn't have to spend as much time looking for resources, because I already had a couple of resources. But it's still challenging. I'm waiting for a Kirkus review to come through this month. It's challenging to figure out how to time everything, so everything comes together at the right time. And I also, with this pandemic, I was living in fear that if I get sick, I may not be able to do any writing, and it might be a long time before this book gets finished. So I was, that kept me under the gun trying to get that done. And I also wanted to get this out there as soon as I could, because a few people knew a little bit about the book, but it was very well received out there by people in my hometown. A couple of book clubs did it. They got a lot out of it because with my first book was, some of them actually lived through that period of time. So they had a lot to reminisce about and so forth. And it was very good. And I think that the Croatian community is going to really like this book and really be surprised by a lot of things that are in it, and hopefully in a good way. Even though I was inspired by these relatives, I didn't want it to just be sort of focused on who they were. I wanted, a lot of the other families in town to say, oh, that was just like my great grandfather or whatever, because a lot of them had very similar stories.
Do you read historical fiction yourself? Is that your?
I love historical fiction. And right now, I am reading an Upton Sinclair series that was written in the 40s, and the main character is Lanny Budd, and his father, he lives with his mother in the south of France, but his father lives in a town in Connecticut, which is, I think, a fictional town because I never heard of it. I couldn't find it, but he's an armament manufacturer. So this really puts them everywhere they need to be during World War I and World War II. And it's actually, it's really well done. I'm really enjoying it. It's 10 books, and each book is like around 17 hours. They're long, and it could have, the one that I'm reading, I actually started with book 5 because it was on a BookBub deal, and so I tried it, and then I went back to book 1, which could have started a lot later, could have used a lot more editing, but it's all very interesting. And I do love reading historical fiction because you tend to learn a lot from historical fiction, and that's what I like to do.
Are there any other questions for Barbara?
Well, I just want to mention, because I, got to get put on my marketing hat, that my book, The Apple King, as well as The California Immigrant, are both available at Amazon. The Apple King is also on Kindle Unlimited. If you belong to that, you can read for free. I know Cindy had said that the Norwalk Library was going to be purchasing some copies, so you could possibly borrow one there. Also, I'm sure the Weston Library will purchase this book. They have copies available of my last book there as well. And so, there's, and then if you prefer to buy from a bookstore, they will not have it on their shelf, but you can order it from a bookstore.
And you can also purchase a copy from the Norwalk Public Library, because we've ordered copies not only for the library collection, but we've ordered copies that we will be selling to the public, and we'll be charging $15 a copy, which is a bargain because we're passing on discounts that the library receives. And so let me know. You can
I'm gonna have to lower my price now to be competitive. The funny thing is, you make my ebooks are like $4.99, but I make so much more money on a $4.99 ebook than I do on a $16.99 paperback because of the printing costs and then the percentage. You get a lower percentage than you do on the ebooks.
Mm. So if you want to purchase a copy from the library, you can email me, cleahy@norwalkpl.org. And Barbara has said that she would sign for us, personalize this and sign. So you can just let me know. But we will have them as soon as they arrive. They're not here yet, but as soon as they arrive, and they're supposed to be delivered. Actually, I checked, and they're supposed to be delivered sometime today. But anyway, as soon as they arrive, we'll have copies cataloged and in our collection as well. If you'd like to read them, you can place them. You can email me. I'll put you on hold for it. And then the California Immigrant, we have copies in our collection that you can put on hold. I think there's, I know that they may be checked out now, but we would be glad to put you on hold, and we can always buy additional copies.
One other thing I'd like to mention, there's a library lending program through Overdrive, and you can get a Libby app on your phone. The California Immigrant was chosen by the Indie Authors Project to be part of a curated collection. So, and also I may be putting that on another way as well, but the curated collection, I think, is like a marketing opportunity to help draw attention to the indie books. But there's more and more stuff going on for indie authors. It's really quite amazing.
It is. It's one of the things that we get the most satisfaction doing here at the library is our indie author events. And Barbara, thank you.
Well, one other thing I did want to mention when I participated at your last Indie Author Day, what I was really struck by is all these indie authors, and one of the beauties of this is that people have an opportunity to tell a story and get it out, even if it's not to a large group, but it would never see the light of day if, because some of these people are doing multiple genres, and so book publishers wouldn't publish that because they wouldn't know how to sell them. And so, you know, it really is a great way of bringing more stories into the world.
Absolutely.
So thank you for all you do, and the Norwalk Public Library does. It's wonderful.
Well, we enjoy it, and thank you for being a part of our AuthorSpeak program, our indie author events, and we're looking forward to doing another indie author event later in the spring. And we will have our AuthorSpeak events. We'll be doing them ongoing on Zoom, and then we'll do them in person once we can.
Okay, well, thanks everyone for joining today. I really appreciate you listening and showing an interest in my my novels. And you know, let me know if you decide to read them. Please, you know, send me some feedback. You can go on my website, barbaraannking.com, and reach me that way through email. And it's on the back. I think the website is in the book, so you can always communicate with me that way. I'd love to hear from you.
Bye-bye.
Right. Thanks so much, Barbara. Thank you.
Thank you.